Hello there. The story around USAID is truly interesting from a cultural perspective as well as an international politics perspective. So, this is a Fox News article. How USAID went woke and destroyed itself. It says Secretary of State Rubio takes over USAID as it's in the middle of an enormous crisis. This is an opinion piece from Fox News by someone who worked in USAID in the past, incidentally. So, it says, to hear critics describe it, President Donald Trump's dismantling of the US Agency for International Development is a disaster. But take it from someone who worked at USAID for 30 years, its fate was already sealed. The US government's vehicle to disburse tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer-funded foreign aid is a troubling tale of a government agency going off the rails ideologically and losing both bipartisan political support in Congress and the trust of the American people. On his first day back in office, Trump issued an executive order halting most foreign aid actions, asserting that the United States foreign aid industry and bureaucracy are not aligned with American interests and in many cases antithetical to American values. 2 weeks later, he blasted the agency for being run by radical lunatics. Trump appointed Secretary of State Marco Rubio to merge its functions into the State Department. Rubio quickly accused USAID of rank insubordination. So, how did the agency become such a pariah? It was formed in 1961 to counter Soviet efforts to spread communism in the developing world, which is something that I would support, of course. Transition former communist countries into US allies, again, in the interest of the US people, one would presume, and respond to global disasters such as earthquakes, epidemics, famine, and war refugees. All good causes, in anyone's book, I'd say. It did so well, but sometimes during the Clinton administration, USAID began to promote radical social agendas, such as population control. Yeah, no longer nearly as positive. Under President Barack Obama, LGBT and climate ideologies were added. Utter nonsense, in my opinion. President Joe Biden topped it off with transgenderism, requiring that every foreign aid program promote this divisive radical stew, even when it came to food aid to starving refugees. What does food aid to starving refugees have to do with the trans community? Exactly nothing. But they want to promote this social contagion as much as possible. In fact, I'd say it's their major goal over helping starving refugees. Now, institutionally, its political culture would eventually skew far left, purged of conservatives and independents. USAID no longer represented America nor its values, becoming a taxpayer-funded heaven for radicals, controlled by an industry of global elites composed of former aid officers and officials from past Democratic Party administrations. In 2020, days after the George Floyd riots, 1,000 USAID staff demanded the agency affirm Black Lives Matter and accused their own agency of systematic racism. More recently, another 1,000 USAID officials issued an open letter defying Biden's Israel policy by demanding an immediate ceasefire between the State of Israel and Hamas, which would give the terrorists an opportunity to regroup and kill more Israelis. As an Israeli, I would say that I agree with that statement quite a bit. Hamas has been known to break ceasefires whenever it has an opportunity to kill more Israelis, and their promises are utterly worthless. So I definitely agree with that assessment. Last year, as America began breaking the shackles of DI orthodoxy, the aid industry doubled down instead. The head of the Society of International Development, an association of aid experts, recommitted to focusing on DEI issues. Interaction, a foreign aid lobby, still pushed its DEI compact, blaming white supremacy for racism in international development. Congress rebuked it by blocking it from receiving US government funds. Meanwhile, USAID burned its bridges to Congress that pays its budget. Agency officials refused scrutiny over its practices. In 2023, Senator Jody Ernest, a Republican from Iowa, now chair of the DOJ caucus, demanded to know the overhead charges of organizations and companies to see if they were overcharging taxpayers to carry out USAID programs. Overhead is basically the amount that goes to the bureaucracy or the aid workers or stuff like that, instead of actually providing aid practically to the people that you're supposed to be helping. So let's say that, for example, you have $1 million, and then you go, well, how much of that goes to the bureaucrats? 10%, like $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. I mean, how much goes out of the 1 million that you have? And the answer, it appears, when it comes to USAID, quite a lot, actually. So she was repeatedly stonewalled, her staff were threatened for wanting to know the overhead. Eventually, she found that half of aid funds was spent on overhead. So if you gave $1 million in aid, for example, to starving refugees, $500,000 would go to the aid workers, and only the other half would go to actually helping people. A government audit of the following year found that USAID could not account for overhead charges of over $142.5 billion in awards. Can you imagine what you can do with $142 billion? That's such an insane amount. Foreign aid became a massive financial boon for progressives as ordinary Americans struggled to pay their bills. Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Jim Risch, a Republican from Idaho, promised to work closely with Secretary Rubio on merging USAID into the State Department, after Risch, a longtime supporter of the Global HIV/AIDS Program PEPFAR, was burned by an aid lobby that had falsely assured him that the multi-billion-dollar annual program was not illegally funding abortion. It had. So, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Brian Mast blasted USAID for funding condoms to the Taliban. Do they even use those? Aren't they banned because of religious reasons? Atheism in Nepal? Why would you do that though? And conducting a culture war on African Christians. Yeah, I didn't know that African Christians were enemies of the United States. That's news to me. The list of stupidities had grown long. Lesson learned? No. On the day USAID's headquarters were shut down, its supporters gathered in protest. Featured speakers were Representatives Ilhan Omar, the pro-Hamas progressive from Minnesota, and Jamie Raskin, who managed the House of Representatives' phony impeachments of President Trump in 2021. The degree of political tone deafness in the aid community is stunning. With conservatives now controlling the White House, US Senate, and US House of Representatives, it's clear the aid establishment made a bad ideological bet. Now USAID is being eliminated. Its supporters cried about the USAID being an important national security tool has fallen on deaf ears. Rubio now must separate the wheat from the chaff, preserving those foreign aid programs that reflect American values and align with US interests, especially in the era of countering communist China. Very true. He must replace corrupt United Nations agencies, partisan NGOs, and for-profit companies with a new cast of aid implementers that cost less, deliver better results, such as local faith-based groups and businesses. Mind you, this is conservative bias wanting faith-based organizations. I'm not saying that they won't be more effective, but that they won't be less corrupt. They may well be, but just saying the choice is definitely partisan, and we'll see if it pays off. Can these partisan organizations be less toxic, less controversial, and more efficient? Hopefully, yes. I think there's a good chance of it because the bar is so low. Now, and refrain from ideological excess. That's the next line, and basically the same hope that I have. We must transition our foreign aid approach away from endless spending to promoting trade and investment, the proven hallmarks of alleviating poverty and ending the need for aid. Absolutely true. A good aid program is one that creates an improvement in the productivity of the people you are helping, so that you can move on to the next problem rather than keep aiding the same people for eternity. You know, the saying about give a man a fish and he's not hungry for a day, but teach a man to fish and he'll be good for a lifetime. It's a daunting task but long overdue. I definitely agree with that much. The examples given do prove, in my opinion, that USAID has become exceedingly partisan, basically woke propaganda worldwide in the cover of aid, maybe even money laundering, definitely very corrupt. And something has to be done about it, obviously. It's good to see that Trump is dismantling it. I'm going to shift the focus a bit, as someone who enjoys gaming as a hobby myself. Politico was paid with USAID funds while pushing anti-gamer propaganda from Gamergate to Veilguard. So for those who don't know, Gamergate started as a protest against the lack of ethics in gaming journalism, because a certain woman who was producing a game or involved in the production of a game was sleeping with a person who was supposed to review the game, like a game journalist who was supposed to review the game, and he gave a glowing review despite the fact that nobody else did. So people were saying game journalism has been utterly corrupted. It's no longer serves its customers to inform them of the quality of the game, but rather it's just propaganda and lies. And it sort of metamorphosized into a fight between the woke crowd who wanted more LGBT and trans and stuff like that, very radical feminist stuff in gaming, and those who just wanted games to remain apolitical and basically as they were before, like 2016 or something. So Veilguard, the latest example that Varadaki, who is a pretty big content creator on gaming on YouTube, says that they also pushed. It's the latest game in a series that was very successful beforehand. I'd say the third was not as successful, or rather not as well received. People still bought it because people buy games and movies based on the previous one, but in my opinion it was quite bad. Anyway, so Veilguard is the fourth in the series, and it's, how should I say it? It had received an awful reception and basically shut down the team, the gaming development team that created it, because they failed that much. I believe that they didn't make half of the revenue that was expected. They didn't cover the cost of producing it, and it pushed, woke agenda quite a bit. The most central character in the game seems to be some queer character that was very preachy, and people didn't enjoy it at all. And, people said the quality of the game is bad, the writing is bad, we don't like it. And the response from publications like Politico was, well, that's because you're transphobic, you're homophobic, you're racist, sexist, evil, blah, blah, blah. The usual slop. And basically it appears that it's taxpayer-funded money through USAID that is funding these articles, because nobody reads them, nobody supports them, and you can see it because nobody buys these games. But apparently hating on people like me is paid by the taxpayers of the United States, probably quite a few of them gamers these days, which is interesting, having your own taxpayer money be used against you in this way. I do hope that people remember this and utterly shun all those publications that were absolutely lying through their teeth about pretty much everything, but funded by the American taxpayer. Now, another example is Anita Sarkeesian, who is a very divisive figure. Basically, she popped out of nowhere, became very prominent because she received government funding from the American taxpayers, apparently, and she was a very militant feminist, basically hated men and blamed them for literally everything that has ever gone wrong, tried to transform the gaming sphere basically away from what men like, despite the fact that men need entertainment too, and there's no reason we shouldn't be allowed to pay for the entertainment we like rather than the one that some feminist broad likes. You can see that they received, for example, feminist frequencies, the woman I just talked about, Anita Sarkeesian, $235,000 from USAID. For a basically single content creator on YouTube, $235,000 is quite a bit. I'm sure you'd agree. And of course, Politico received millions, not thousands of hundreds of thousands. Finally, I wanted to talk about the influence that this funding from USAID had on the gaming industry as a sort of litmus test for the broader impact they had on the population at large. So if you notice, 24% of game developers identify as LGBTQ, which is a huge overrepresentation compared to the population. And among young age groups, 18 to 24-year-old game developers, 43% identify as LGBTQ+. That's a huge overrepresentation. Why do we have this? Well, because the US government under Obama and Biden forced this upon us. You can see that the percentage of the population identifying as LGBTQ in 2021 was 8%, which is a lot. It used to be less than 2%. If you go back 10 years, it's like 3.5%. And when I was young, it was about 2% less than, even depending on where you're asking. But now it's 8%. Is it because in our media, entertainment, and culture, these themes are so overrepresented and these people are in charge? Could it be? And is it that they are in charge not because of their amazing skill, because nobody wants to buy what they're peddling, but rather because they receive taxpayer money from governments like the American government, but there's also some Nordic countries. Was it Sweden that funded such games and movies and stuff like that, comics? I'm really sick and tired of this social engineering by governments secretly, covertly, believing they know better than us, the people, what we want and what we should be. They want to literally socially engineer our perception of ourselves, of gender, of attraction, and so on, according to their values, without us knowing, and we have to pay for it. Can you tell me that this is not sinister? That this is not Machiavellian? That this should be allowed, should be legal? Because I disagree with all of these statements. I think it is Machiavellian, sinister, and should be illegal. I think that the people who did this should be taken to court. And I'm very, very happy to see that Donald Trump, at least in America, which is the most powerful purveyor of media in the world, or at least used to be, nowadays it's more Asia, let's be honest, because nobody wants anything that the West peddles, but there's still a lot of money there. And they are trying to influence Asia nowadays. There's a lot of attempts by the UN, the WEF, and the American government under Biden to force the censorship and sort of social engineering of manga and anime and all of that Asian culture. So far, it hasn't been too successful, but if it continues long enough, it would probably be an economic pressure that cannot be avoided, which would, of course, cause people to just abandon the Asian market as well and move on to the next place. If need be, we would even just stick to old stuff and just weather the storm. There's a saying, we can remain autistic longer than you can remain solvent. We will just wait you out. We will not comply. So, what do you think about USAID and its influence on international politics and on culture? Do you think that they've been doing a good job? Do you agree with the tenets that have been spreading around the world? Do you think that they have the right legally and morally to use taxpayer money to do what they've done? Or do you think that they have overreached, that they have become ideological and cultish, that their ideology might even be damaging, certainly from the point of view of over half of the American population that funds them, and that there is every reason under the sun to get rid of this entire government program and start over? I would, of course, agree with the latter, but I would love to hear from people who disagree with me. It's through debate and discussion that we actually sharpen our minds and develop our worldviews to be as robust as they can be. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.